This is the Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast presented by ClutchPoints. Like, follow, and subscribe. Rate us, review us, all that other fun stuff. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and we're coming to you here for Week 12 NFL picks. As always, I am joined by the man, the myth, the legend, my dude, Mr. Matt Russell, who is sports betting professional and creator of The Window. Available on Substack and via podcast. Mr. Russell, how are you doing this morning, my friend?
That is a loaded question, my friend. That is a loaded question. We had to
set you up there.
Yeah, we had an art imitating life or life imitating art situation on Sunday where we had a rough go of it in the NFL and we had a rough go of it in the health department. Good news is I might be down like 10 pounds. Bad news is I have maybe a day behind in my preparation this week because of an aggressive 19 or 1800s influenza situation that maybe took part over the course of the weekend. So, but we're back, as one does. Everybody's been through it. Everybody gets it. I'm going to introduce myself to some of these games this week, basically on the podcast live here. Which is not usually the situation. I'm like, oh, Bears and Vikings play this week. News to me. So let's see how this goes.
Let's go. We will get fired up and get things rolling for sure on the Week 12 Picks Pod. For folks who might be new to what we do here on a regular episode, I'm going to give you my pick, and then Matt comes in with the information and education on where the line was, where it is, where it could be going heading in to kickoff. And the hope is that we come out on the other side with a much more informed pick. I play the role of the viewer. Matt sometimes convinces me to change my pick, and other times I foolishly don't listen. And that's the joke. That's the bit. But my goal is to win more games than I lose. And right now, kids, I have to offer an apology because I am not holding up my end of the bargain. But last week, a 6-8 week, another week in which we were 6-6. I was 6-6 heading into the Sunday nighter. And then you just watch the Sunday nighter and Monday nighter not go your way. And we will deep dive into those games for sure. But the season total, 80, 84, and 2. We will be getting back to the winning ways this week. I'm confident. I'm feeling good. Lots of bye games this week.
Yeah.
Or bye teams, I should say.
Fewer games.
Falcons, Bills, Bengals, Saints, Jets, and Jags all on the bye week. And we begin. That's a lot, right? I had to triple check that because I was kind of like, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah, if there was ever a week to be woefully underprepared, it's one where there's only like 12 games on the schedule. It's like, I can catch up. Right.
Also, too, I wonder the fantasy implications. Is this something I need to deep dive into next year for fantasy? My team's doing good with bye weeks, but I'm just saying some other people might be a little screwed this week. Anyways, we start our picks. Right. I'm fired up. Let's go. On Thursday Night Football, as always, with the Pittsburgh Steelers heading to Cleveland as 4-point favorites against the Browns, a classic AFC North showdown here. But for me, I'm going to be honest right here. AFC North battle, short week, home team as an underdog by more than a field goal. Defensive battle, but Jameis as an underdog, just slinging the rock, getting points. I think I'm on the Browns here. Yeah. Browns +4. We talked about it leading in, and the Steelers were able to win a game against the Ravens without scoring a touchdown, which I don't even know how that makes sense in 2024. But here we are. This is a very weird one. And my lean has to be on the Browns here just because all of those things I mentioned. But the Jameis factor, and I don't know what's going on with the Browns one week to the next. But here we are. What say you, my friend?
I mean, well, listen, this is, speaking of being underprepared or whatever, this is a game that we talked about sort of tangentially last week, right? Where it was throw together a Steelers money line, Browns money line against the Steelers parlay. Right? Where it's Steelers against the Ravens, because it's like they're going to beat the Ravens, right? They're going to be at their absolute apex in the market, in there, in the locker room with the vibes, all of that sort of thing. And when that happens, that's the time you go against Mike Tomlin, right? Like you want Mike Tomlin in those like 50-50 pick'em type games. You want Mike Tomlin in the rivalry games. You want Mike Tomlin as an underdog, big underdog, home underdog, things of that nature. Where you don't want Mike Tomlin is on the road as a favorite against a team that is more than familiar with the Steelers, right? And that's the situation here. There's a situation going into that game. And so, you mentioned the part of the deal last week, you talked fantasy football, right? Like I was going up against Chris Boswell and his 24 kicking fantasy points, but that's the permission element to some of this, right? And when I say the permission element, I mean like, it's one thing to kind of be like, well, like I think the Browns here, but part of the permission in taking the Browns, or in this case, fading the Steelers, is seeing that they didn't score a touchdown last week. Yeah. And allowing yourself to kind of just be like, they got by in that game. Listen, I was on the under there, and that cashed like super, super easy. But part of it is like, yeah, Russ, I think his QBR was like 14 in that game. Like it was literally like the worst in the NFL, I think, this past week. So he was maybe not the worst because Mac Jones. Yeah. Mac Jones was involved. I don't know that that it was worse than Mac Jones. I'd have to double check again, underprepared this week. But yeah, like, it's like, well, Russell Wilson's like, I don't know if it's a come back to earth situation, but just kind of like, he's all right. And, obviously this Browns team, you can't quit Jameis Winston. Like I'm right there with you. I was just kind of looking ahead to be like, all right, if I say that this is the last straw for Jameis Winston, like, can it be the last straw? And then I look ahead to like next week, and it's a Monday night game at Denver, where Denver's a 7-point favorite in the look ahead line. And I'm like, oh God, that's going to be a spot where I'm going to be interested in Jameis Winston +7 on the road. I'm like, oh my God. So, again, are we just going to roll that parlay over, right? Where it's Cleveland +4 this week and Cleveland +7 next week. That's kind of like, honestly, in part of the season, and why it hasn't gone necessarily the way that I would have liked this season, we've talked about it before, is sort of schedule luck and kind of one game rolling over into the next and being able to kind of ride the wave. And it doesn't mean betting on the same team every week. It means sort of catching the zigzag nature of the ratings for these teams. And so, the Pittsburgh Steelers rating goes up, the Browns rating, which like obviously went way down with Deshaun Watson. Like we think like it's coming back, right? It's coming back. And even that game last week, we talked about the idea of, and when you and I talked about it, right, it was +1.5, I think, for the Browns.
Yes.
They end up closing as favorites, right? Mm-hmm. So we beat the market conceptually on the idea that like the Browns are going to play better. Our whole concept was the Saints, like they're not going to get like missed field goals and Marcus Valdes-Scantling long touchdowns, are they? And then all they did was get Marcus Valdes-Scantling touchdowns and missed field goals, right? Like Dustin Hopkins couldn't make a kick to save his life. But like, again, we can't go around living our lives trying to handicap what kickers are going to make kicks, because all of a sudden Justin Tucker stinks. And you know what I mean? And like Evan McPherson can't make a kick. You're talking about, that Bengals game. So yeah, like this is just kind of, again, stick to the principles. Maybe it's just a bad season, right? If it's one bad season out of 5, that's one thing, maybe not ideal.
I have faith. Is the season. I have faith. I'm good.
Maybe it's a few weeks, right? Because by the way, like 3 or 4 bad weeks, they start to feel like it's been the whole season. And it's not. It's 3 or 4 sort of mediocre weeks. And it's like, fast forward to 3 or 4 weeks from now, and we could be on like the hottest streak of our lives just by sticking with the principles, right? And there's a bunch of different examples that we'll get to as we talk about some of these games from last week, where like, again, you're apologizing. Listen, we have a rule in the golf game, right? When you are playing with a partner, right? You just first tee, you go, all right, you and I both know we're trying our best. No apologies, right? Like, I know you're trying to hit a good shot. Like, if you hit a bad one, like it's golf, that's going to happen. We do not say, I'm sorry, right? This is a no sorry situation. And so, like, you're talking about, being 6-6 going into that Cincinnati LA game. Man, like, if there is ever a coin flip, game,
it's insane,
right? Like, and there's a bunch of others, like I said, that are going to be sort of based off of point spreads, where it's like this team could have covered, this team could have covered. That game being, a pick 'em or 1-point spread type of a game. Mm-hmm. Kickers, Evan McPherson, right? Justin Tucker, Dustin Hopkins, your guy Moody from 2 weeks ago. Like they're out here wilding, right? And so, like, I don't know. Like maybe Chris Boswell has another 18 points worth of field goals in him, but is that going to be enough to cover this number. It was enough to cover and win last week, but they need to do more on this short week. And we talk about Cleveland. Yes, they're 2-8. Season is down the drain. Season's been down the drain all year. But like this feels like, and this is the part of the season we're at right now, right? Where you go, this is their Super Bowl. Home game against Pittsburgh, prime time, right? Like this is as big as it's going to get all season long. If we're looking for a team to play to the top of their range, a team that was capable enough to beat the Ravens just a few weeks ago, this is the spot for the Browns. And, again, Steelers, it's just not that of an important game. They did the sort of hard thing already. They'll have that rematch with the Ravens, and they are going to want to and need to likely win that game. This is one, this might be a Chris Boswell wins it by a field goal, but it also might not be. Might be Browns outright. And again, I wasn't kidding when I was talking about, putting those two money line parlays, two teams in a money line parlay together, because we're going to be rumping this thing on Thursday night.
Let's go. I like it. I like it a lot. Browns +4 is the bet there. And the other game that we move to on Sunday features a team that we talked about it last week. The Niners, who are heading to Green Bay as 2.5-point underdogs. Talked about it last week, how I thought the Niners were cooked. We were on the Seahawks last week at +6.5, and I was adamant last week for those watching at home that the Niners would win but not cover. Not only did they not win, but they let Geno Smith walk off on them and give them the Steph Curry night celebration. Yeah. That is a moment I realize that this season is over. Wow. That's what I'm saying right now. The season's over. Not making the playoffs.
That's drastic.
It's a wrap. It is very drastic. I'm being emotional here. But not emotional enough to say, with all that said, I'm still on Niners +2.5 this against the Packers, because I feel like the Packers right now, the Packers are a good team. I still think they are a really good team, but this Shanahan-LaFleur matchup is always interesting. It's always close. They always play each other tough. And I just think right now, Jordan Love's playing too loose, a little too loose right now, Jordan Love.
That's what he does, yeah.
I know. Niners defense needs to improve, needs to get better. Another week of McCaffrey back in action. I wish I would have known Kittle wasn't playing a little earlier last week, because that seems to matter. It's like the Niners are at the point where they need everybody to be in the lineup. And I'm not counting Brandon Ayuk, but they need everybody in terms of Debo, Kittle, McCaffrey, Trent to all be in the lineup. And I mean, here we are, Niners +2.5. I'm not liking it. I'm not loving it, because I'm not loving my squad right now. No. But I will hold on to the fact that I'll take the 2.5 points against Matt LaFleur and the Packers.
Yeah, I'm with you here. It's for a bunch of different reasons. I'm not really understanding the line here in this game. Okay. I kind of don't even really know where to begin here, because okay, well, let's start just with the idea of like 2.5, right? Meaning that if the Packers are getting a couple of points for home field advantage, you're telling me that the Packers are the better team. Okay. And I guess when we sit back, we could say that that's the case, or at least that's possible. But the Packers got their highest rating last week because they're coming out of a bye. Jordan Love was healthy and everybody's excited. I was excited about it, yada, yada, yada. On paper, we should have been on the Bears last week because it was a classic, buy low on the Bears. Obviously, everybody like jump and ship on the Bears. And a classic sell high situation being that the Packers were at their highest rating. And they probably should have lost that game, right, to Chicago. So the Packers rating can't come up. If anything, it should sort of revert back. And we've referenced, the numbers over the course of the season, right? Like the idea that the Jordan Love healthy version of the Packers before the season and when he sort of played was around like a 57 out of 100, right? And I don't know if you like sort of recall that number being kind of the key number in their rating. And so when they were rated like a 61 last week, again, that should have been a red flag. But again, they're coming off a bye, so you're like, okay, maybe we have some high expectations here. So let's say that 61 was too high. The Packers have to come down. What number would you put it at? Well, I think 57 is a safe number. Where do you have to go with the 49ers to get them to 2.5 here? Well, you have to go lower than like 57.
Yeah.
And so now we're looking at 49ers 56, 55. Well, Shell, you and I both know, like, this 49ers team has been rated last season mid to high 70s at various points, right, during the like absolute apex of like, you know, winning streak, et cetera, et cetera. Even before the season, you know, some people forget, like, there was concern about the 49ers before the season started. It was a little bit different, right? Ayuk was holding out. Trent Williams was an issue. McCaffrey's injury. We've talked at length about how sort of up and down that sort of was. So I guess my point is like, yeah, they lost to the Seahawks last week, but I can't I can't talk myself into the 49ers being this low, even though every week it feels like it's something, right? 1 week it's Moody, 1 week it's this,
only
1
just because
week
the
it's
bar's
that.
so high. It's only just because the bar is set so high.
That's right. But, you know, the point here is obviously that the bar has come down. Now, if the Packers had won that game, covered, and everything was easy peasy last week, you'd be like, okay, well, the 49ers came down a bit, rightly so, and the Packers stayed at the rating that they had been given last week. But that's just not the case. And then I look to the look-ahead lines, which are instructive in what it sort of tells you about these teams, not just for this matchup, but like how they're rated as a whole. Yeah. So using these ratings, the Packers, it's a little bit dicey, but they'd be around a 4-point favorite on Thursday night against the Dolphins. I don't really have a huge problem with that. But this rating would say that the Bills should be 4.5-point favorites at home against the 49ers. And you and I might say, like, that's actually pretty fair because the Bills are good, or at least we think they're good. But the look-ahead line is -3. So maybe the move is just bet the Bills -3 right now and wait, not even bother with any of this stuff, right? Because
I gotcha. I see
if the Packers win, then the Bills are going to be, you know, more than -3 next week, and it's like, just get the good number now type of thing. And maybe that ends up being sort of what happens, right? That line moves up. But what it tells me is that next week there is some hope for San Francisco being back up into that rating area where the Bills, you know, currently operate, because Bills -3 next week means that the Bills are basically 1 point better than the 49ers. Maybe there's 2.5 points of home field advantage there, so they're a 0.5 point better than the 49ers. So what is this, right? Like, how did we get down to like the mid-50s if mid-50s at Buffalo next week, in my mind, or based on the sort of calculus here, means 4.5, right? So like the number doesn't really make sense, and it doesn't make sense in the favor of San Francisco. So taking out, like, I don't know if Kittle's going to play, like, certainly seems like he's going to, the desperation element, all of that sort of thing, and just getting points with San Francisco, which, like, listen, things have to get dire for good teams to get points.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's, you're never going to be like, oh, they're playing their best and they're the underdog. It's like, that doesn't really work that way. So, like, this is that buy low situation for San Francisco, where it does feel like the sky is falling. But when you look around and the Cardinals are the team that you're chasing for the NFC West, it's like, okay, maybe that's not that big of a deal. And even if they sort of have to be relegated to the NFC wild card picture, well, guess what? A game against the Packers is a really big game too. And so they've blown all these leads. They could blow another one. They could be up 6 and lose by 1 and still cover this spread. We're not going to get 3. I think there's a reason for that. And, you know, honestly, I think when I first glanced at this in my haze of, of influenza, of Black Plague, I was like, wait, is that 49ers -2.5 or Packers -2.5? Because you're right. Like, the Packers should have played a really good game last week, and they didn't. And again, we'll talk about the Bears and sort of what influence the Bears necessarily had in all of that. But yeah, man, like 2.5 seems like too many for me, and I'm not ready to sort of completely. I don't think they're cooked. I'll put it this way. I don't think the 49ers are cooked. Listen, they have a tough schedule, don't get me wrong. But for one game where they're an underdog here, and listen, if it ends up being +4.5 next week at Buffalo, like maybe I'm back on that train. Who knows? But yeah,
I think I'd definitely be on that train.
Yeah, right. And so if you'd be on that train, then this rating is too low for the 49ers, barring some sort of injury news that we don't know about.
No. I totally get it. Totally understand. And I am obviously emotional about my 49ers. And I think that people listening to the pod understand when I am emotional versus trying to give the real logic here. And the real logic is the fact that no matter what, these Packers-Niners games are legit. There's so much familiarity there. It's going to be a close game. And in the likelihood of close games, I will always lean to taking the points, especially if you think the team can outright win. And we wouldn't be stunned if the Niners won this game, right? Like nobody would be like, oh my God, I can't believe it.
No.
So, yeah,
Here we are.
Here we are. Niners plus 2.5 is the pick there. We move on to the aforementioned Bears, who you mentioned escaped or almost were able to escape with a win.
Yeah,
against the Packers. Should have won if their coach was able to, I don't know, maybe get a couple more yards, help out their kicker a little bit, maybe.
Right.
Lots of things going on there. But the Bears are now at home, and they are hosting the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota, 3.5-point favorites on the road. I feel like the Vikings just keep plugging along under the radar, and spread-wise, they covered last week against Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Spread-wise, they covered the week before, even though it wasn't pretty. Versus the Jags, was it? And like their record remains good, but we're not talking about them the same way that we were early on in the year.
Mm-hmm.
I, though, will still be laying the 3.5 points with the Minnesota Vikings here on the road. And that's a tough one because I know obviously home dog, over a field goal, supposed to be on the Bears here, but I'm just not buying the Bears here. I'm just not buying that Bears performance last week. I think that's more of a Green Bay issue than it was the Bears have magically figured something out here.
Right.
They might have got a little boost from their, was it a new OC they had in there as well? Some things going on there, but I just like what the Vikings are cooking, and 3.5 might be a little bit too much. I get it. I understand it, but I'm willing to lay it and be ahead of the curve.
Yeah. And that's where it kind of starts, right? Where the offensive coordinator and you go, okay, well, what has changed? And you get some of these results in the NFL and you're like, I don't know what was different. Right. And you're just like, it's football, it's the NFL, it's weird. Like, I don't know. At least when there's sort of a smoke, there's fire situation is kind of happening here where, like maybe the Bears with the, new offensive coordinator who's telling Caleb Williams, hey man, he gets down to like a Spider-Man pose and then he starts kind of like taking off. Like that stuff isn't really going to work, right? That worked at USC. We've talked about this all season, right? You are not a good enough athlete to have that stuff work in the NFL. And so he, from a metric standpoint, his numbers when he gets the ball out in that like 2 to 2.5 second, or under type range are outstanding. When it takes him longer than 2.5 seconds, it's over, right? Whether it's him not being able to complete a pass or the offensive line not being able to hold up. And that was the thing last week. The market is agreeing with you because this was -3 and some, obviously there has been enough bets to take this up off of 3, which for me is a little bit concerning because my lean is towards the Bears in this game because all you're looking for is that sort of reason why something has changed. And so when we get that reason and then we can apply that going forward where, the Vikings defense, like it's complicated and it's going to confuse you, but like, if he just throws the ball really quickly and doesn't allow the Vikings to like do Viking-y type stuff on defense, like that there could be some success. But it's really more for me about the Vikings here, where I look at this and I go, and we talked about this last week, I think, the Vikings might have a Sam Darnold problem here. And they're getting by, you mentioned them covering against the Jags. That was the early week number, the sort of Wednesday podcast number. By the time the Jags had Trevor Lawrence had been ruled out and had gotten up to 7, right? Because right. And so it was like 12-7 game. They didn't end up covering that spread. So I just wanted to sort of clean that up because like, I'm watching these games and I had team total, and this is again classic like this season in the NFL where like what's your record? Well, I had team total over 23.5 for the Vikings last week. And they go and they missed an extra point. And anytime anybody's bet a total, it's like as soon as that kick gets missed, you're like, no, it's just not gonna happen. But you sort of talk yourself into like, well, maybe. And so you're watching the fourth quarter, and the Vikings spent the entire fourth quarter between like the 40-yard lines on the field where you're just like, man, could you get into field goal range and kick a field goal to get me over? Because they finished with 23 points exactly. Probably should mention that,
of course,
within context if you hadn't sort of figured that out.
23-13, yes.
23-13, yeah. And it's just like, Right. Of course, the extra point gets missed, and they can't get into field goal range, right? And so there's the occasional explosive play to Justin Jefferson or Jordan Addison. But I'm watching Jordan Addison. I'm just like, how is this guy not going for 70 to 75 yards per game? How is Justin Jefferson not leading the league in receiving yards, right? Because we know the offensive scheme when everybody's healthy, right? So I'm willing to blame things on Sam Darnold, or at least suggest that I'm blaming things on Sam Darnold. But like, again, what is the reason for a lack of touchdowns, the run game kind of falling apart here? You'll remember a couple of weeks ago against the Rams, Christian Darrisaw gets hurt. Needless play at the end of the first half where the Vikings could have just kneeled the ball out to finish the half. Instead, they had to run a play. He gets rolled up on. He's out for the season. Now they go and they replace Darrisaw with Cam Robinson, right? They plug that hole, I should say, because it's not a replacement. Cam Robinson is not as good of a left tackle as Christian Darrisaw was. And so everything else kind of doesn't fall apart necessarily, but it's more of just like a little crumble. And so when I look at the offense now, whether it's against the Colts, against the Jags, or last week against the Titans, there's just something missing from before the season. And the answer to that is time. Sam Darnold isn't getting the time that he had early on in the season when Kevin O'Connell was able to cook up all these wide open receivers, because Addison's healthy now, Hawkinson's healthy now, and of course, Justin Jefferson, right, should be getting 100 yards a week. And he's not. And so I just look at this and I go, in Chicago, you're getting 3.5 points. There's reason to believe the Vikings might not be as good as they were before the season started, even though the rating isn't changing because they are winning and occasionally covering. Whereas there's also reason to believe that the Bears, again, they have decent players, right? Get the ball in the hands of DJ Moore and DeAndre Swift and Keenan Allen and Roma Dunze and Cole Kmet. Like, there's reason that they can be better. And maybe it was just the offensive coordinator. Everybody hated him. He wasn't any good, blah, blah, blah. Speaking of like red flags, right? He was not a very good offensive coordinator in Seattle, and they hired him anyway. And that's why Matt Eberflus is not going to have a job at the end of the season, right? Because he screws stuff up at the end of games and he's made bad hires. And I'm sorry, you're out. But in the meantime, like, this team can be competitive. And by the way, the defense is still really good, and they don't give up pass touchdowns. Right? Jordan Love gets 2 passing touchdowns every game that he plays while healthy. Couldn't manage it last week against the Bears because they are one of the best teams in the league at not allowing the other team to score via the pass. And again, Sam Darnold just throwing picks left and right into the end zone. I think we're looking at a lower scoring game. And if you're going to give me 3.5 points with the home dog here, like, I'm going to take it. And honestly, I'm a little bit worried for the Vikings that they might not win this game because, again, a couple interceptions go the wrong way or get taken back to the house. It gets ugly quick. They've had a pretty easy schedule here these last 3 weeks.
Yes, very tough times for sure. As I said, I'm trying to stay ahead here with the Vikings, trying to stay ahead on the Bears just being not good. But interesting stuff there. You almost had me. Almost had the first switch of the game.
Fair enough.
Almost. But we will keep it moving here. I'm sticking with the Vikings at -3.5. But of course, hey, you got the buyer beware there. Next game, we got the Lions as 7-point favorites on the road in Indy against the Colts. Anthony Richardson and the Colts' huge win against the Jets, as you tried to tell me last week. Speaking of cooked, that the Jets were cooked.
Yeah.
And that's an example of me not listening. And I think I stated last week,
right?
Oh, don't worry. I'll be back this week right now to admit how wrong I am by not taking the Colts last week against a very washed Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. No. But here we are. Colts, big win. Lions, speaking of big wins, 52-6 against the Jags. And I said last week, I'm just riding the Lions here, and I'm going to ride the Lions again this week at -7. I mean, I know it's on the road, but it's indoor turf, all that fun stuff for the Lions again. 7 points. Yeah, I'm just riding the Lions. Yeah,
I mean, this is one where if we got picky, we might have to say you'd have to give 7.5 here because this is that sort of in between 7.
No, let's do it.
You're like, I don't care. Because I mean, you can get the 7.5, you got to pay, or 7, you got to pay for it, -120, whatever. I will say, okay, well, starters, all right, what's going on with the Lions rating? Well, it's through the bleeping roof. right, at this point, because like you, people are just wiling and looking to do whatever, it takes to bet. Yeah, exactly. They're up to, I have them at 77 because this is nice when you can play a team. Yeah. When you can, you almost spit out his beverage there.
Like, I know I'm riding with the Lions, but damn.
You're like, hold up. Yeah. So the Colts here, right? Like the good news is they won last week, obviously covering as an underdog. So it's not, this isn't a 7.5 because the Colts need to be downgraded because you can't be out here downgrading teams off of underdog wins on the road, right? Where Anthony Richardson looked notably better in the passing game, footwork, timing, etc. Right? His pass completion number last week, like his over-under was like 14.5, I think, where it was like expectations were like incredibly low. And so he ends up driving them down the field. Like the thing that you actually don't expect Anthony Richardson to do, right? Like he had 10 carries for only 36, I think it was, yards, something like that. He was a little bit underneath his rushing yard total, unfortunately. If you told me he was going to run 10 times, I would have bet a lot more on the over for his rushing yards. But if he can do sort of both now, like that's what they're looking for, right?
Yeah.
And so is he going to be able to do both against the Lions? Well, maybe is obviously the answer to that. I mentioned the Lions rating. Like when the Colts don't have to get downgraded, that means to get to 7.5, we got to do some upgrading for the Lions because they just put up 50 points and scored a touchdown on basically every drive against the Jaguars, right? And like that's impressive, but at the same time, when stuff like that happens, it's really more of the other team than it is you. Like if it were you, right? If you were you would just do that all the time. But like it was the perfect matchup for the Lions, who go up against this Jags team who like refuse to do anything but play man-to-man coverage on defense and absolutely do not have the personnel to play man-to-man coverage on defense. Like name me one cornerback, defensive back on the Jags, right? It's like not an ideal circumstance if like you're only going to play man-to-man coverage. And when you're going to have the Lions, and you know the Lions offense, right? It's crossing route, play action, crossing route. And it's Jamison Williams just running track up and down the field, right? Amon St. Brown, like making a cut, he's open. Boom, 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 boom. The thing about the Colts is they are the exact opposite of the Jags. They are like drunk on zone defense. It is cover 3 until you're blue in the face, right? And so those crossing routes don't necessarily have the same effect from, like, they're not going to be big plays, right? They are going to be rally and tackle type plays. And they're also difficult passes to complete, like even at the best of times. Because in zone, right, you have to time it so that it's like there's a guy here and a guy here, and he has to, the receiver's coming across. Like you got to hit that window. You got to hit that window, and you got to hit it now, and you got to hit it while there's the defensive liner, pressuring you in your face. And what are the Colts really good at? They're good at knocking down balls, right? They're good at interior pressure with those defensive tackles. Your guy DeForest Buckner, and so I just kind of look at it going like super high rating for the Lions off of just the most perfect matchup against those Jags. And again, like if it was anything other than plus 14 last week, I'm not betting it, but it's like you jerks got me with the plus 14 on the Jags. But you're just watching this game going like, this is just not a real football game because the matchup is just so atrocious. And so if the Colts can, I don't know, stay on the field longer than Mac Jones could, because Anthony Richardson is using his legs, the 10 attempts, I think, is the most important thing from last week. And he's able to complete some passes, which, again, the market didn't think he was going to do much of last week. You're back at home. You are the underdog. You're going against a team that's rating is literally the highest. It's not just the highest the Lions rating has been all season. This is the highest rating of the season.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much, like you just said, like give me any price you want. And if that's the market sort of treating of this, like those two things are tied together because you're not the only one saying that. And you watch the media and the Lions are the greatest thing since sliced bread and all that sort of thing. Meanwhile, they were down 2 touchdowns 2 weeks ago to the Texans. The Texans teams that I'm still underwhelmed about, and I don't know that the Texans are that much better than the Colts because we've watched the Texans and Colts play a couple of times, and both games have come down to the wire, right? Where it's like all we see out of the Jags, especially this edition, is quit, and I can't believe Doug Peterson. Like, I need to find, like, has he been fired yet? Like, are we just waiting on this? Like, what's the situation?
I honestly thought it happened and I just missed it yesterday.
I did too, because again, I've been like
the
catatonic for 2 days, and I was just like, well, so who's the new coach? And they're like, I don't know, everybody just went home. Like, nobody bothered to like make a decision because they're on, their bye week. Or like, I don't know, they're saving money or something by doing this. I don't know, right? Shad Khan, again, like maybe he's in England. I don't know what the deal is. So yeah. So long story short here is like, this is a grin and bear it situation, and just be like, all right, man, like numbers say +7.5. This is, again, the basics. This is the type of thing that, like, no, it's not going to win every time, but it is going to win 56% of the time, if you will. And like, again, maybe it's one of those 44 this week because the Lions against anybody is just a bad idea. But like, the Lions had the attitude last week that you want from a team. Hey, if you're not ready to play and you're going to come into our house, we are going to beat the bleep out of you. Like, they didn't have to keep the starters in the third quarter. They chose to, like, everybody is getting a touchdown out of this deal. Right? Like, we are not done until all the starters, all the key guys, St. Brown, Williams, Brock Wright, the running backs, like everybody's getting a touchdown today before we leave. And we're sending a message to these teams. But like, I think the Colts are going to come ready to play. A team that was playing with the Buffalo Bills, except for the whole Joe Flacco turning the ball over, like it was like the happiest thing he's ever done in his life. Like, you want some of this? You can have. Like, it was a Christmas situation, and that's what got Anthony Richardson back in. He's taking that and literally running with it, and I think the Colts can compete here in what is kind of a weird game with the Thanksgiving game looming in 4 days, like early in 4 days. For the Lions, right? Like, a really kind of a nasty little spot here for the Lions before they host the Bears on Thursday at high noon on Thanksgiving.
Totally fair. Totally fair. As I guess, much like the game before with the Vikings, I'm just rolling I'm rolling, trying to stay ahead, and will accept the loss by rolling with the team for 1 week too long.
Okay.
Just, yeah.
Okay.
I know. Our next game here, we got the Cards at Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Seattle Seahawks favored by 1 point.
Mm-hmm.
As mentioned, Seattle with the big win. Geno balled on the Niners head top. The Cards coming off a bye week. The first place Cards. I feel like I should mention that part. This is the first matchup that these two teams will play. These division rivals will play each other. Mm-hmm. But they'll play each other 2 times over the next 3 weeks.
Ooh.
I feel like I'm kind of zagging here. And what I mean is, I should be on the Cards, coming off a bye week. The Cards facing a Seahawks team that, maybe the Seahawks were very emotional after a big win in San Fran. There could be a letdown here. But no, I'm on Seattle because I just think Seattle's a better team. I feel like Seattle, especially when healthy and with our guy DK Metcalf, they're just a better team than the Cardinals. And the Cardinals, really, before their bye week, wins against the Jets and Bears, and they got by. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just not. There's not enough there for me to be believing in the Cards here. Give me the Seahawks, and I'll roll with that.
Yeah, we could almost begin and end this conversation with, like, the Cardinals were home underdogs to the Jets, and now they're pick 'em on the road against the Seahawks
in Seattle.
Like, where do you think the value is based on that premise? Right? So that's kind of like, right? Like, it's like, well, if you just put it that way, like, that's fine. Now, the sort of counterpoint is, they destroyed the Jets in a way that, like, as bad as the Jets are, like, not every team or even any team really has just annihilated them, and that's impressive, and that warrants an upgrade in the market, and then a bye week gets them rested and all of that sort of thing. How important was it that the Cardinals had a bye week, though? Right? Because I look at these bye weeks and I go, like, did you need it, or is it kind of jamming you up because you had decent little flow going? And the Cardinals come into that bye week going, like, the flow was pretty good, and now it's like, okay, well, you're gonna take the week off. We're going to watch all these teams and, like, wait, we're still the NFC West leaders after last week? Like, all right, like, that's pretty cool. And again, whether it's coming out of the bye week or credit for beating the Jets, like, their rating is as high as it's been all season long. They are, by my sort of calculations here, kind of a 54 out of 100. And if the Cardinals, they're going to go on and win 10 or 11 games, okay, like that's fair. But this is a team that was like talked about in like a 6.5 win territory type situation. And so beating the Bears, who then, turned around and a week and a half later fired their offensive coordinator, and beating the Jets, who are sort of systematically firing everyone that they can sort of, let out of the building at this point in the season.
Yep.
Doesn't really get me that all jacked up. And I think maybe the perception of the Cardinals changes. The standings certainly change if the Chargers don't have a couple of key fumbles 3 weeks ago on Monday Night Football, right? Maybe a 5-5 Cardinals team with a win over the Bears, home win over the Bears, home win over the Jets. Doesn't seem all that impressive. Meanwhile, you got the Seahawks. And if, listen, you might be right about the whole like idea of a letdown. I have no sort of way to obviously know whether that's going to be the case or not. But if they beat the 49ers, and we talked about the 49ers rating coming down off of that loss, if they beat the 49ers and the Seahawks rating goes up to the point where it's at, 54, and if their rating was 54, you know what? They'd be -2 here, right? And, you have Seahawks -1 because that is technically the case, but this is really more of a pick 'em game in the marketplace, right? There are like -112, Seahawks are -112 on the money line versus Cardinals -108. There's some -110s, but like in the column of the point spread, you also have like -1 at like -105. So this is really kind of a half-point spread. If these two teams were rated the same, the Seahawks would be -2. Maybe even -2.5, because we're getting into that like Seahawks home field advantage portion of the program here, where it's just kind of grim and wet, but still loud somehow type of portion of the program. So, and as far as on the field stuff is concerned, you mentioned like the health element, right? Like DK Metcalf, talked about him, really important player for the offense. We didn't talk about the offensive line getting healthier last week. Abraham Lucas played in his first game last week, and that's an offensive tackle, which had been a problem issue for the Seattle Seahawks. And he's keeping guys at bay, right, as you know, from the 49ers defense, I should say. And then from a defensive perspective, the defensive line has gotten considerably healthier and more improved. They've made some trades with regards to like linebacker, where the defense is getting better. They did a nice job against Christian McCaffrey. I saw a breakdown talking about how the 49ers offensive line is getting beat in run blocking a little bit more, and they're using obviously a lot of examples from that game against Seattle where McCaffrey was getting bottled up. But at some point, maybe the Seahawks get a little credit for that, don't they? Right? Like maybe their run defense is improving a little bit too. It's not just bad San Francisco offensive line. Maybe it's a little good defensive line for Seattle. So like it's starting to come together. You also have a new coach where like you want to say new coach is going to, it's going to work right off the bat. Or for the most part, these new coach things start to take a little longer, 10, 11, 12, 13 games to get the defense, right? Two healthy corners that weren't necessarily healthy all season long. I think that helped against San Francisco because Rick Woolen didn't play in that first 49er game. He played in that game last week, and all of a sudden it wasn't so easy getting up and down the field as it was a couple of weeks before. So like Seattle has to get some of the credit. And also it's reason why you might like San Francisco even more in that Green Bay game, because it's like, yeah, San Francisco should get some credit, or Seattle should get some credit for being maybe an above average team. And right now the market has not changed their rating to reflect that, because certainly you don't downgrade them off that loss, and they're not getting upgraded because they're still being rated at like a slightly below average or average team here by being basically a pick 'em at home against the Cardinals. Yeah, man, this is Seahawks for me.
Yeah, I mean, you're just confirming things that I thought in terms of like sometimes we just get these matchups where two teams are meeting for the first time and it's been throughout the season, and you just say, I just think this team's better than that other team, right? Yeah. Like, and I know that's not gambling analysis, right, but sometimes it's just how it plays out, right?
Well, there's a bunch of weeks where this is Seahawks -3, right? And it just so happens that we're playing in week 12. Right? It's exactly. Week 12. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, okay. Well, the week 12 matchup, we just landed at a point where the Cardinals were considered here and the Seahawks were still kind of considered here. And it's like 3 weeks from now, we might be back to this game should have been -3 type of a situation.
Well, we will have this game in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Just flip-flop. So
be interesting to see what the line is.
Take note. You shall take note. Let's keep it moving though. We got the Patriots who are on the road in Miami to take on the Dolphins. Dolphins are 7.5-point home favorites here. And the Dolphins' easy sched continues. They covered last week versus the Raiders. But to me, that game might have been closer than the final score
might have
indicated here. And your man's Gardner Minshew just doing the most to help his team not win and not cover.
Right.
But now they're 7.5-point favorites against a Pats team that, first off, I think might be better than the Raiders and are moving the ball better than the Raiders. And it's a divisional matchup. I get that this game is in Miami, but you're telling me I can get 7.5 points over a touchdown? Let's go. I'm in on that.
Yeah. And that's the type of thing where, again, if there's no guarantee it's going to work out and all of that sort of thing. I believe you were with me on the Raiders last week. I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me. I wrote about them earlier this week, or at least talked about it on my podcast earlier this week. The yardage was basically the exact same.
Yeah.
And if you're going to tell me I'm getting 7.5 points, the game closed 7, by the way, so you're beating the market there. If you're going to tell me that we're getting the same amount of yardage on either side, I'm going to take those 7.5 points. I just am. I don't think I talked you into the Patriots last week, and so you avoided basically the same situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But it was the same situation, right?
I watched.
I was going to say, I don't know how close you watched, but it was the same sort of deal.
I have Stafford in fantasy. I was watching.
Where you're sitting there going like, both teams here have the same amount of yardage. There's maybe a turnover margin situation. And the thing for the Raiders fell apart. They go and they backdoor cover a game that they were in. The Dolphins had absolutely nothing for Brock Bowers. The game that they were in, they go and they sort of, what should have been a backdoor cover. The Dolphins are essentially in, and you never know with these teams anymore, but they are essentially in kill the clock, let's get a couple of first downs and kneel it out mode. And the Raiders just have a full-scale breakdown in coverage. And Jonnu Smith is wide open. They lob one to him, and he just goes running through down the field like a Swiss boy through the meadow to get a touchdown late. And it's like, yeah, of course he's going to score that touchdown. Why wouldn't he? But there's a million different ways in which the Raiders covered that game, right? Not even a 56% type situation, like an 84% chance. But what happens, right? The Dolphins get the win. They look like they've scored a bunch of points and all of that sort of thing. And so the market goes let's creep the Dolphins up back to where, not quite back to where they were before the season started, but let's get them closer there. Meanwhile, I'm still sitting there going no. I watched that game extremely closely. I'm not there. Cool, nice cover, but seemed a little BS-y to me. So between that and the Patriots not covering a game that, again, if you had told me it's going to be a one-score game, the Patriots are going to have the ball, and you're getting 4.5 points. And that's all I'm going to tell you. I'm not telling you whether the Patriots up 3, the Rams are up 3, the Rams are up 4, the Patriots up 4, whatever. I'd be like, give me that bet all day, every day. And it just so happens, a couple of things, and it's a 6-point game and not a 4-point game. So you beat yourself up about losing that bet, but it's I'd make that bet again, right? And Nakua makes an insane catch for a touchdown, and there's a similar coverage gaffe where it was really more of a cover zero situation. Your cover zero against Matthew Stafford. Figure it out, Jared Mayo. Come on, man. You're just not even making correct sense at this point. So, the coach stresses me out because Gerard Mayo doesn't, appear to know what he's doing. But I think you're right. I think the Patriots offense is better than the Raiders offense because the Patriots can do more things. They actually weirdly have more weapons. None of them are amazing or jump off the page, but Drake May's out here spreading it around. He's taking off running. He's out here doing some stuff. He's a better quarterback right now than Gardner Minshew is, and we're getting the same price for the reasons that I just sort of stated because of last week's sort of dueling, stupid results. Yeah, man, plus 7.5 here? Hell yeah. Minus 115, I think, is the price you got to pay, and I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you for sure. We will be on the New England Patriots plus 7.5. We keep it going here to the Bucs and the Giants. Bucs favored by 5.5 points on the road. Both teams coming off a bye. The Giants also announcing that they are starting Tommy DeVito at quarterback. Yeah. And we're in the Vegas zone. This is a lead where I'm just all right, so my initial thought is nobody knows what's going on in this game at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Tommy DeVito getting that start. And my question here is, right? Obviously, they make this move coming off a bye week, so you're giving him the preparation time and all that fun stuff. But what exactly are the Giants doing here? Because he was their number 3 quarterback. They paid money to bring in Drew Lock to be their backup quarterback, who was their backup the whole time.
Yeah.
And there's whispers about not starting Daniel Jones anymore to avoid the money.
Yeah. Well, that's
So cool.
Yeah.
Are we going all the way to the number 3 here? Why is that?
Are vibes the right answer here? Like, doesn't it kind of feel like for at least one game and one game only, like the whole Tommy Cutlets thing gets revived and it's a home game?
I'm on the Giants plus 5.5. So
right, it's a home game, so everybody like, let's go. I will say, like, Shell, you and I have been over it, right? We have the sort of 20 to 80 rule when it comes to this sort of thing. We just talked about the Lions getting pretty close to 80, where like you are sort of obligated to bet against them when a team gets that high. Yep. The Giants, with this adjustment from Daniel Jones down to your boy Tommy Cuts, are at 20. They're at 20, right? Like, so I looked at this and I was like, first instinct, oh my God, they're going away from Daniel Jones. This team's, disaster, quit, all of those, sort of catchphrasey words. I want to be on the Bucs. And this is when I talk about like schedule, sort of luck or whatever. I'd love to bet on the Bucs this week. Love to. I think the Bucs are a pretty good team with or without like those receivers. Your guy Baker Mayfield coming off a bye, tasting a little blood in the NFC South with Atlanta stinking it up all the time. Love to. By policy, you know what I mean? Like, this would be going against policy if I took the Bucs on the road minus 5.5.
That's a lot of points.
It is. And the other thing is like, what the hell was Daniel Jones doing that would make like this require a downgrade, of that nature, right? Where it's still Daboll, it's still all, Tyrone Tracy and all, and like get the ball in the hands of Malik Neighbors and whatever. Again, the Cutlets thing might be a vibes, like, get everybody fired up at home, bring in the
Drew Lock.
It's just raw chicken all over the place. Like, everybody is in their deathbed 3 days later, like, like I was last week. I don't know. Poor Drew Lock. I mean, as if anybody's ever uttered those words. Like, if you even remember like Drew Lock's general sort of, speaking of vibes,
he rapped that one time,
right? Right. And it's like, he's on Denver, he's on Seattle. It's all very just like cool career. You're going to make a ton of money here, just never actually doing anything. And the one thing is, I guess, that like if DeVito gets hurt or something like that, I don't know that there's a downgrade if they have to go to Drew Lock. And I actually kind of like Drew Lock in sort of a don't think about it, just get out there Drew Lock type situation. Yeah, so like it's not comfortable, and like maybe we get 6, so I don't think you need to like rush. Speaking of like the Vegas zone, right? Like you don't have to like knock over the women and children here to bet on the Giants. Like think about that for a second. But this is a Giants team that fundamentally, like, they lost by 5 to the Commanders just a couple of weeks ago, and it wasn't because Daniel Jones was awesome, right? The roster around it is not that bad, and the Bucs don't get a tremendous amount of pressure defensively, right? We've watched Kirk Cousins light up the Bucs in a bunch of different ways. And when Kirk Cousins gets pressured, he's toast. And when he doesn't, he's fine. So I use that as an example here because it's like, well, maybe there's not going to be necessarily a ton of pressure to take advantage of the Andrew Thomas situation, which is the thing that you and I have talked about. Sort of, when Andrew Thomas, the left tackle of the Giants, gets hurt each year, that means it's sell time on the Giants. But right now, sell time at 20 out of 100 from a market rating perspective, it's just not something that we should be doing, right? And again, it doesn't guarantee a win. It just means like you got to just keep sticking with the principles.
Yeah, that's a tough one for sure. And things will get even tougher. I mean, I'm going from being on the Giants plus 5.5 to our next game, which is the Cowboys at plus 10. I can't believe I'm doing this. Yeah. The Cowboys are in Washington taking on the Commanders, and the Cowboys hung tough for a bit against the Texans. I mean, it was kind of close on Monday night. Now they head to Washington, and a short week for the Cowboys. Commanders on kind of a mini bye as they played last Thursday. But even with that, I still think 10 points is a lot. And I know the Cowboys are really bad. I get it. I understand it. But 10 points just feels like too much for me here. Because like you talked about the Giants rating being down. What's a Cowboys rating now? Like what does it mean the Commanders rating is, and what's a Cowboys rating for this to be 10?
Yeah, I don't know if this might augment the Giants argument, and I say argument with quotation marks. Do you know what the spread is for Giants Cowboys on Thursday?
No idea.
Give me a guess. Giants at Cowboys Thursday
Giants
afternoon,
at
traditional
Cowboys.
Thanksgiving game.
Oof, who's better? Damn, I don't even know who's favored. Pick them.
The Cowboys are favored by 2.5 points, which is all you need to know about what's happened to the Giants rating, right? Because that is applied to next week as well.
Yeah.
4 days later.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is for that's the low bar for the Giants where they're like, still got to go Cowboys next week. So, yes, the Cowboys rating is low. It is not quite Giants low. And if you flip it and you go, I think that, you said pick 'em, which again, like I don't think you can give home field advantage to the Cowboys anymore. So like pick 'em really does mean pick 'em in that game. You're telling me that the Cowboys are still overrated in this game because they're not a 20, right? Like they're a 23, right? Like they are still not getting the same level of like disregard as the Giants are for benching Daniel Jones. They are removing Daniel Jones from the equation, and people are still like, Cowboys are better. And I'm just like, are they though? Because I watched, you watch that game against the Texans and you just go, all right, I've watched this twice now, Texans and the Eagles. And I go, how do the Cowboys score? And obviously hindsight is 20/20, but the answer is explosive, kind of, for lack of a better term, fluky play, where you just happen to catch Kevontae Turpin on a slant, and he's just really fast and the fast track, and he's gone. I don't know that there is a drive for the Cowboys, like a long, like actual executed drive that concludes with a touchdown. Fair. And so you go, all right, so they kind of need like a fluke touchdown. They need multiple field goal drives. And then what's the deal with the defense? And by the way, the offense could just as easily give up a touchdown.
Also true.
Right? So like they might just be net as far as even if they get that fluke touchdown like they did against Houston, they might also give one to the other team, or at least, short field, like quasi defensive touchdown. So I just go and like, what is the score of this game going to be? And it's like, I'm finding it really hard to get to Cowboys to like 13-ish points. Maybe they get to 13. Can the Commanders score 24 or 27? And you mentioned the idea of the mini bye. And one of the reasons that we didn't like the Commanders on that Thursday night game was it was a quick turnaround and Jaden Daniels is injured and all of that sort of stuff. And then you watch the game and he like refuses most of the time to run, and they only kind of use him on that fourth down play. You should take it, look at him on the sideline, and they're constantly like, it's jersey up, strap him in, like all kinds
every
of
single time.
Every single time. And then you go, all right, but he's still playing. So like maybe 10 days off means that he gets a little healthier. And after, a couple of losses here, Steelers and the Eagles, maybe there's a little more urgency with the Commanders. And it's like, now that the Eagles have sort of taken that lead in the division with the tiebreaker, you go, all right, it's now NFC, wild card. And like when you sort of stop looking at one team as the team you're competing with, in the division, and then you start looking around at the conference and knowing, oh man, like we have to deal with all these. We're now competing against not just one team, but like 7 teams for 3 spots. Mm-hmm. There's some urgency, right? So there's rest, there's health, there's urgency. They're the better team. They're at home. This is a rivalry, all of that sort of thing. I think the Commanders can get on the Cowboys, whether there's a defensive touchdown or not. I think they can get to the mid-20s on them. Yeah. I just don't know that the Cowboys can get to 14. And so like it's a lot uncomfortable to lay 10 with the Commanders, but we know they can blow out crappy teams. Saw it against Carolina, right? And right now, Carolina and Dallas and the Giants and a couple other teams are rated right at the bottom of the league together. And so this is probably, to be honest with you, like from an actual pure betting standpoint, I can see this being a scenario where like somebody comes along and decides +10 is a really good idea, bets it, and we can get 9.5. So again, no reason I don't think to like knock over the women and children to get to the window here, to get to your accounts. Wait on this because we've seen it time and again. 10-point spread comes down to 9.5. Even some 9.5s go down to 8.5 where you can tease. Imagine, Shell, that this thing got to 8.5.
I can't.
Right? Well, yeah, that's right. But like, you're like, oh, pick 10, like maybe I can. Right. So like what if, right? So again, like maybe it's a teaser at 8.5 down to 2.5 at some point in the next week. So either way, I think this can't be Cowboys. This has to be Commanders. And again, part of that is just the idea that if the market somehow believes that the Cowboys should be favored on Thursday against anybody, then we haven't seen rock bottom from what the market thinks of the Cowboys. When maybe we should see that.
Yeah, tough times in Jerry's world for sure. And
yeah, watch for falling
L's. Yeah,
stuff.
They're taking L's at Jerry's world. They're taking L's everywhere. So yeah, tough times there. Speaking of big spreads, though, the Chiefs are in Carolina taking on the Panthers. Chiefs 11-point favorites. Panthers coming off a bye. Chiefs coming off their first loss of the season in Buffalo. Yeah. And listen, I guess I'm looking at this as the get back game for the Chiefs. But I will say this, okay? Like they should be able to beat the Panthers by 2 touchdowns. They should be able to, despite the fact that I know they don't really beat anybody by a lot.
Yeah, this is like the test of that.
They also have a weird short week next week too, right? Where they're playing the Black Friday game against the Raiders. So, I mean, it's a tough one here, but I just can't. I just can't. If my only reason why I would be picking the Panthers is just because they're coming off a bye week, I mean, they're coming out of the bye still as the Panthers. Like I'm trying to think of reasons why I'd be the Panthers, right? Or how I could talk myself into it. It's like, bye week, maybe they figured some stuff out. And it's like, nah, they're still the Panthers.
Yeah, there's nothing to figure out.
The Chiefs, I keep saying it and it hasn't really happened, but we need to have a game where we see the Chiefs kind of like the offense of Mahomes kind of look good, don't we? Like, doesn't that have to happen at some point?
That's right. And I think, well, I mean, no, it doesn't have to happen. I think you knew that, like I would say that. Okay, so my handicap for the game here is 4 words. I want to do this without flipping you off. Fair number, no play.
Okay.
Like 11 is just fair. Like there's no, like, I'd make all these cases why this team's overvalued, undervalued, whatever. This is fair number, no play. Now, you made the point about like, did the Chiefs have to do something here on offense eventually, blah, blah, blah. This to me is like, I don't know how Carolina scores on the Chiefs defense. You can bring in the rookie tailback out of Texas, Jonathan Brooks. You can tell me we got a Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks, 2-headed monster. You can, tell me the Jalen Coker, the Coke heads are all fired up. Right? Like you can tell me that Bryce Young has it all of a sudden. Again, 2 straight wins. Yeah, against the Giants, where tough like they tried so hard. Well, yes, but also like they tried so hard to lose that game to the Giants. The Giants just opted not to take it. And we talked about that Saints game, right? Where it was like the Saints were way better. They just somehow coughed that up to the point where they, had 200 fewer yards, the Panthers did, and they still won. So, yeah, the Panthers are out of that sub-20 range from a rating perspective, but they are still only 20, right? And so, fair, right? And so I don't think they score, and honestly, I don't know the Chiefs score all that much either. So I think the under is the only way to look here because I think you've got kind of this really kind of thoroughly kind of crappy game that maybe the clock is moving pretty quickly because the Chiefs are running the ball a little bit more. Pacheco potentially being back in this game as well kind of leads you to think maybe it is 7-minute drive, 8-minute drive, like that kind of thing. So fair number, no play. Can't really see a ton of scoring necessarily in this game.
No, I hear you. And it's one of those interesting things too that you mentioned where it's like, even if the Titans or the Panthers, pardon me, are able to do anything, it's like they still might not get to 10. So yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, like
Picking up what you're putting
scoring
down.
touchdowns. Like I can't even really imagine them doing that against the Chiefs.
Yeah.
All right.
Totally.
So like 3 good drives is 9 points. Right, and like a decent-ish Chiefs showing might be 20. We might be a 20-9 game. It's like, yeah.
Let's go. Chiefs -11. We move on to, I said the Titans because I was already staring at the next game here. And the Titans are in Houston to take on the Texans. And I almost mixed that up because there's a lot of Titans and Texans.
It's the worst
going on.
Yeah.
It really threw me off there.
The Titans-Texans thing in the same division. We got to do it twice a year. And like a lot of years, they just kind of seem like the same team. Like which team has Matt Schaub this year? Right? Like just the last 20 years of our lives have just been tormented by
tough times here. Yeah. This time though, it's the Texans who are the 8-point favorites.
Yeah,
short week for said Texans who smashed the Cowboys on Monday night. I still don't think the Titans are good, but 8 points is a lot for me against a team that is coming off a short week here.
Right.
I guess it comes down to how bad I think the Titans are.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're 8 points bad in a divisional game on a short week. That's just where I'm at here.
Yeah. There's 8.5. There's 8.5. And I'll put it this way. I say that like I'm surprised by it, and I shouldn't be because the market ratings come out to exactly 8.5. Right? You downgrade the Titans a little bit for losing and not covering against the Vikings.
Yep.
The Texans, like they got a boost, right? The sort of thin air boost, if you will, before the game against Dallas because they were getting Nico Collins back, and the idea was that they're gonna be, off and running again. Then you watch the game, man, and like I don't know, maybe I'm the only guy out here on this island, but like I'm just underwhelmed when I'm watching the Texans. Like I'm still the same thing. It's like the tricky plays like don't make sense, and they don't come at like the right time. Like they come in the red zone and you're like, all the defenders are like close. Why are we running like these like misdirection-y type plays that like would work, I think, a lot better at like midfield, for example.
Yeah.
And yeah, like the offense and CJ Stroud like just doesn't seem to be working for me. So the Titans don't give up a ton offensively. They don't give up a ton in the passing game. They don't give up a ton of like explosive plays. And so I just kind of think like for the Texans to cover this game, they're going to need that 70-yard touchdown from Nico Collins, the way that they almost had in the first play of the game, which would have been, pretty wild. So, and listen, the Titans offense isn't great by any means, but like, I just kind of think, you can say it's a divisional type situation, familiarity with these two teams. I think the Titans are at least kind of getting to a place where it's like, we can throw it to Westbrook-Ikine. We can throw it to Calvin Ridley. Like we have a couple of options. Will Levis has stopped doing like heinous, catastrophic things. He's now just kind of bad instead of like ludicrous. And so it's like, well, that's an improvement, right? And so, yeah, like I get why this is up to 8.5 because the numbers people are going to look at this, be like, well, it should be 8.5 and it's 7.5. So like, I'm going to bet it. I'm going to kind of come back on the other side of this, right? Like if people want to be taking Houston down to -2.5, hard for me to argue that, but like the fact that that's available for people to do, and like I tend to think that like if they were all that afraid of this line being teased down to 2.5 and have that leg open for everybody for the teasers, they would move it up to 9, and maybe it goes to 9, and then we get +9. So, I think that +8.5 is certainly good enough. Maybe there's a +9. +9 not being a key number. So, you don't have to wait on this. You can probably just grab the Titans +8.5.
I hear you. 10, Tennessee. I was in between saying the Texans and in between saying Tennessee. That's what just happened there.
Or Titans, you could have even thrown in there. That's the thing.
Yeah,
it might be easier.
To my guy from the Penguin. I don't know if you've been watching Penguin. No.
It's on the list.
So that reference means absolutely nothing. I will just move on. And there's someone out there listening to this pod right now that understands exactly what I was saying. But we will move on. Broncos. I would have then had to explain the kid has a stutter. And anyways, Broncos.
Yeah.
5.5-point favorites in Vegas against the Raiders. The Broncos did the thing that I didn't think they could do in terms of blowing out the Atlanta Falcons last week. It happened. We saw it happen. It's a thing. Now, though, they're 5.5-point favorites on the road.
Yeah.
Am I to believe that the Broncos that much? Am I to believe in Bo Nix that much to lay 5.5 points on the road? Like, that's tough. I got to believe the Raiders are trash. And I do believe the Raiders are trash.
Yeah.
I don't know about that trash that I can I'm leaning here on Raiders. You see it. It says on the screen, Raiders plus 5.5. But I mean, that's just out of principle. That's not out of any belief here that I'm Gardner Minshew riding with them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm confused too. Yeah, we talked about last week, right? Like Atlanta in the look-ahead line was -1. Denver ends up being 2.5-point favorites. I think that actually came down a little bit to 2. Speaking of things that have, sort of come our direction from a point spread perspective and not worked out remotely well from a results perspective. Yeah, and it's Kansas. You go back to that Kansas City game, right? And it's Denver. Look-ahead line's 9.5, closes 7.5.
Yep.
Denver outperforms that difference, right?
Yeah.
And so you go, yeah, it was right to come down. And even then, it wasn't even close to being sort of kind of correct. Like it should have gone further. Atlanta's -1 in the look-ahead line. It closes Denver -2 or -2.5. So a 3-point change, and Denver crushes them. And so it's still not enough, right? And you're just like, wow.
What's happening here?
Wow, right? That's all you can kind of say. Look ahead line for this game. Denver -3.
Okay.
It's another 2.5-point change, right? So we are moving 2.5 points this week. We were 3 points the week before and 2 points the week before that. That's add that up real quick for me, man. That's 7.5 or 8 points of just actual football points in the last 3. Am I crazy or is that a lot of points? That's a lot of points. So it's just okay, if Denver's just going to keep doing this, then I guess we should just be riding them into. I mean, they're 56 out of 100. It wasn't that long ago we were talking about this team being rated in the mid-30s.
Am I going to switch this here? This is what's happening here?
It's not about switching because let me get to this sort of end point here. I'm not betting on this game. I have Bo Nix Rookie of the Year tickets that that even at the odds that they have changed, they went from he was 14-1 and Jaden Daniels is -1400 1 week ago today. 1 week ago. He is now plus 300. He has moved from 14-1 to 3-1 in 1 week.
Okay.
It's the Raiders, man. Blow out the Raiders again, put up big numbers. Sean Payton gets credit for Coach of the Year regard. Bo Nix gets credit for Rookie of the Year regard. The Broncos get closer to this idea. We've talked about them in the preseason podcast, right? Being second in the AFC West. The Chargers are out here being a problem, trying to, block the Broncos from doing that. But again, I need wins. I need Broncos success. I don't necessarily need them to win by 6 points. So why would I sort of make that ask of them, knowing where they have kind of come from and gone to in the market? So the number's inflated, but the number had changed significantly the week before and the week before that. And didn't matter because the Broncos just outperformed the hell out of all of it. So you tip your cap, you go, let's keep it going. But it doesn't mean I have to bet on the Broncos.
I'm doing it.
Change it.
Betting on the Broncos.
All right.
The reason being is because the trends, the numbers are showing me that this is just a thing.
Yeah, they're not. The market is not catching up with how good the Broncos are. But again, it is a 3-game sample size.
And also the Raiders, the thing standing in the way of this is the Raiders.
Yeah. I mean, listen, home game for the Raiders. So what, right? Gardner Minshew against pressure against the Broncos defense. Nothing I want to be involved with there, right? And the Broncos, I think, are smart enough to be hey, you know what? Brock Bowers probably should cover him. right? Because that's the danger on the literal only danger on the Raiders. And by the way, I think the Broncos already beat the Raiders pretty easily this season, so it wasn't like that was much of an issue the first time around.
Pick switch. Denver minus 5.5. Can't believe we're doing it, but here we are. It's the week.
There's no rule in the rule book. There's no rule in the rule book that says the Broncos can't be really good. There's no rule.
Yeah, it's just a distaste for Sean Payton and his aesthetic. But hey, got to remove your emotions sometimes. We move on to Sunday Night Football, and the Eagles are 3-point favorites in LA, taking on the Rams. Eagles have been rolling. The Rams are a team that can move the ball with their guys when they have everyone there. But it's still like, I don't want to say a magic act with Matthew Stafford, but he's doing the thing. Like Matthew Stafford is balling the last few weeks, right? Yeah. I'm taking the points here. And the thing that has me nervous, like this is just a classic home dog, big spot, getting a field goal. But I could see the world in which Saquon just runs all over these guys. Like I can see it, but I just don't know how much I trust my guy Sirianni. And, even though I got to stop saying that because they just keep winning games. And I'm seriously, I'm calling myself.
No, you're right. You're right. It's the
3 points is too much to me. 3 points is too much for me. I'm going to take the 3 points with the Rams here and trust that Stafford and company can keep this game close.
Yeah, I'm just kind of like looking around here, shopping, if you will.
Shopping for numbers, no problem.
Yeah,
Stafford and Nakua, I'll give you this too. Stafford and Nakua and Cooper Kupp, that is like, those guys just get open. I don't know, like it's play design, it's route running, all of those things. Mm-hmm. Those dudes just get open.
I don't know what I'm going to do with this game. Is that okay to say?
Of course it is. It's Wednesday and they don't play until Monday.
Sunday night, yeah.
Or Sunday night, sorry.
Yeah. It's just because like you mentioned, the Eagles, right? Like I don't know what to do with it. The thing that you want to do against the Rams, right, is you want to throw the football against the Rams. Right? And Jalen Hurts has to be better, man. He has to be better than he was on
Thursday. That's not a Jalen Hurts thing. It's not.
It's like it is, but it's so inconsistent, right? It's like it is and it isn't because it depends on the game. Because you're watching that game on Thursday night and you're like, this guy needs to throw that football 1 full second before he's throwing this football. And you can say like, oh, these guys dropped the ball. It's because the timing of it was trash. And it's because Hurts was late over and over and over again. And they're coming up with reasons why it wasn't Hurts' fault, whether it was receiver drops or, quote unquote, good defensive plays by the other team. And it's like, man, if the ball was accurate, if it was thrown by Matt Stafford, it would have been a touchdown or it would have been a first down. And A.J. Brown wouldn't have had to like mute himself in the middle of the game instead of like, I know he wanted to like lose his mind on that one play where like he cooked his corner. The guy was lying on the ground. A.J. Brown turned around, expected to see the football, and then watched that football sail out of bounds 5 yards away from him and 2 seconds too late. And so if Jalen Hurts can promise me that he and Sirianni and what's his name, the offensive coordinator, my apologies, Kellen Moore, the guy who was on the Chargers and the Cowboys, if they can promise me that Jalen Hurts is ready to throw the bleeping football on time, maybe they can, right? Like LA indoors, like et cetera. Like maybe that offense can absolutely cook the Rams. And so that's the thing that would make me want to bet on the Eagles. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think that the Rams are particularly good, right? I think they are just kind of right. Okay. Like, you mentioned Stafford, but like 2 weeks ago on Monday night, like he wasn't very good against the Miami Dolphins. So like I'm beating up on Jalen Hurts here, but like we also have to do a little bit of beating up from time to time on Stafford. And so can Fangio put together a plan and an understanding that like, if we can just do something against Cooper Kupp and something against Puka Nacua, which like clearly Gerard Mayo, it was like those guys were new to him. The Fangio thing is a really big deal here for Philadelphia because we talked about the idea of new coaching and being like, well, is it going to work in the first game? Like, well, probably not, but is it going to work in like week 11, week 12? It's like, if it's gonna work by then, and it has for the Eagles. And so, I look at this and I see, and the reason I was kind of shopping around going like, all right, like if you want your +3, you certainly can have that -115 available right now. I think there is going to be a lot of interest in the Rams at +3. And so I think there might be some -2.5s on the relatively cheap. And I think that might be where I go when it comes to this game on Sunday night, because, I'll be the dope. I'll be the dope who thinks Jalen Hurts can get the ball out of his hands. And again, you might be right too about the running element, because even if he isn't particularly good throwing the football, like they can do other stuff. And like I said, the defense can be as effective as it has been this season. So there's just a lot of ways the Eagles can beat you. We're just kind of waiting for them to all kind of come together. And maybe that is, in LA against the Rams, because, again, there's nothing about the Rams that says like, oh man, like this is going to be some sort of, difficult effort.
This is going to sound weird to say, but it's like the Eagles should just be better than the Rams. And I'm saying this, I'm on the Rams, right? But I'm saying the Eagles should just be better than the Rams. But it's almost like the Eagles haven't found who they are yet. Because I think that the Eagles should be defensive, pound the rock, run team. And then everything comes off of that, where Hurts now you're just throwing off play action, you're throwing to open spaces, you're throwing to open guys.
Yeah.
And they just can't, they're like caught in between. And then too many games where it's like they get into the second half and then it's like, oh yeah, we have Saquon. Let's just give it to that guy.
Yeah.
And he busts like 2 touchdowns. Who was that? That was against the Commanders, right? Last week.
Yeah.
It's just like, what? Anyways.
They are doing that, because you're watching that first half of the game and you're being like, it's Saquon on first down, Saquon on second down. And then it's either Hurts on a tush push on third, or Saquon on 3rd and 3, or maybe they have to throw the ball and it's like 50-50 on whether Hurts is going to be able to complete the pass. And that was what like every drive kind of came down to. So it's like they're getting there and they're wearing down the opposing defense because the drives are taking a long time. And by the time the fourth quarter rolls around, they're just like, we're done, we're out, we don't want anything to do with this. So again, but it's just like, it's so close to being really good, where if Hurts just connects on some of these passes, it's like, it becomes a problem the way that it has been a problem the last couple of years for the rest of the NFL, where the Eagles are 10-1 to start this season, or, whatever record it was 2 years ago. Yeah. And they're 8-2 or whatever it is now, or 9-2 or whatever it is. Like, and so it's like, yeah, like you shouldn't be complaining about it, but you're watching the quarterback miss these opportunities, and it's because he wants to run the football. Right? He goes back and he goes, all right, like first read's not there, let me run it. And it's like, or, oh, there's some pressure coming, now I can escape the pocket because I like doing that because he feels healthy. Right? And there's part of him is like, let me just flex my legs out here a little bit because I didn't get to last season. So it's like, it's all good news. It just hasn't come out in like a dominant performance. And I guess just sort of instinctively, part of me thinks we might have that Eagles dominant performance on Sunday night, where like, it's overwrought at this point, but like Chris Collinsworth is like, I don't know, Mike, like, I don't know anybody's going to stop the Eagles when they're playing like this. And it's just like, yeah, that might be this Sunday, but I don't know. Maybe we're waiting for that like all the time, and then maybe it's just never going to come, but I think it actually does.
I can't believe I'm doing this because I wasn't going to do this, but I'm changing the pick.
Was it the Collinsworth impression that changed it for you?
Yes, it was actually. Oh. It was really, no, you know what it was for real? It's just the more and more we talk about it, it's just the Eagles are better than the Rams. And like the Rams aren't really that good. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on with the Rams where like, it's like, if I think about what I try to do, and I think I just did this on our last game as well. I try to think like, why would I be taking this underdog team? Is it because I actually think that they could win this game?
Yeah.
Or is it because it's like, oh no, I see them hanging on late and Stafford might be able
plus
to
+3. We're getting a full field goal. Like that's always kind of attractive.
It's not because these two teams are actually.
It's what I mean by like, I think there'll be interest in the Rams conceptually and why you might see some 2.5s, which I think would be sweet. Because again, this is a Rams team that just lost. I don't know if they got beat convincingly, but they lost on the scoreboard convincingly to a Dolphins team that I don't think is half the group that this Eagles team can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pick has been changed. Eagles -3 is the pick for Sunday Night Football as we move on to our final game of the week, which is Monday Night Football. Funny how that works, isn't it? We got the Ravens as 3-point favorites in LA, aforementioned LA, against the Chargers. The Harbaugh Bowl here. Big win by the Chargers versus the Bengals last week, while the Ravens, they lost to the Steelers, as mentioned. Lamar and company not looking good on offense at all.
Yeah.
I mean, also not getting much help from their kicker, who we've known to be lights out, and maybe that time's coming to an end. Who knows that like your season could be in, not your season, but like your Super Bowl hopes might be hanging in by the thread because of your kicker. That's a tough place to be. But
Hall of Fame kicker, by the way.
Hall of Fame GOAT potential kicker. Ravens -3 is my pick here. I like what the Chargers have done, right? But the Chargers still showed the full Harbaugh makeover isn't not complete. It's there. The foundation is there. The building blocks are there. They're making moves. They're a solid team. They won a game that we've seen the Chargers charger up a lot, and they still somehow won that game. This to me is more about Lamar and company. I don't know if I can see them having two bad offensive games like that in a row.
Yeah.
And if we go back to, yes, this is a Monday Night Football game. This is like, them just, I see the zag coming, right? From where last week they were bad. Yeah. This week the offense is here.
Right.
It's like, no, they're fine. That's the Ravens team that we saw a couple weeks ago. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you have to give some credit to the Bengals for that comeback, right? Like there's a certain point of like Joe Burrow is just awesome. And
Jamar Chase is like, just throw me the ball.
Right. And it's just like, give them 60 full minutes of football. Like they're going to get you for a couple of quarters. And it's like, that was the best Charger game in years. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, you're going to replicate that. And by the way, you're like Evan McPherson being like functional away from like potentially losing that game. And then you're going to have to do it again this week against, I don't know that there's fear of Jim Harbaugh out there or whatever, but like Jim Harbaugh's got a few tricks, right? Like he's out here, like, junking it up a little bit. His brother, isn't going to be buying what he's selling over there. Like,
for sure,
as indicated by, Super Bowl from a few years ago that you might remember.
Why you got to do that, man?
I'm sorry. This is another one. This is closer where there is some 2.5s here. So I think you can get Baltimore -2.5 at -115. I think this is that sort of classic buy low-ish, sell high-ish situation. It isn't like a drastic upgrade or downgrade by any means, but obviously coming off that game last week. But it's part of the handicap last week was the Steelers are very good against Lamar Jackson. So when the Steelers are very good against Lamar Jackson, you can downgrade the Ravens, but you should also give some credit to the Steelers because they have just come up with this plan to be able to contain as best they possibly can Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
And just because the Steelers can do it does not necessarily mean the Chargers can do it as well.
Correct.
I will sort of make the point that it's not just the brother thing here, right? It's Jesse Minter, like, used to work for, obviously he's worked in the Harbaugh like ecosystem, Ravens, John Harbaugh, whatever. So like he knows it pretty well. And so it's not like he doesn't understand what the Steelers can do against Lamar Jackson, right? Like he's familiar with what they could possibly do. It's can you execute it? So, again, just from, and then you go Justin Herbert against the secondary of the Ravens, and you go like, he probably can do some work against the Ravens secondary as well. So, this isn't like, an overwhelming endorsement, right? But it's like, I certainly understand why you would take the Ravens in this game because it's asking a lot of the Chargers to kind of do this back-to-back weeks, and the Ravens are, coming off of that loss, and so there is some, evaluation drop, if you will, in the Ravens. I think we're going to get another good game. It's scary because the total's like 50, and the Chargers, up until last week, don't give up very many points, but again, they don't play very many good offenses. And I think the Ravens can be a good offense. I think the Chargers can be a good offense against this Ravens defense. I think we're in for a fun game, and maybe the over is the play on Monday night, even though it is a pretty high total. So lots to still think about when it comes to this game. Of course, I'll have the game preview for that on late on Sunday night, early on Monday. But, those are just sort of my thoughts at the start. I think we did a decent job getting through some of these games with relatively low prep. But this is one that, I haven't really thought of all that strongly. I can't talk you out of what you got there.
No. The tough part for me here with this game is more so about just the Chargers, the levels of it all, right? The Chargers are on their way up. They're making their moves. They're doing it.
Yeah.
Ravens to me are already there. And the reminder that, there'll be people who are kind of discouraged off the Ravens because of what the Steelers did to them last week. Mm-hmm. But as you said, that's just more about how good the Steelers defense is and what they can do and what they've historically done to Lamar Jackson, even before this year, right?
That's right.
But on the flip side, it's not like they got tore up by the Steelers offense either, right? Mm-hmm. It was field goals, and that's how they lost. So, I'm not down on the Ravens. This is more about me sticking with my principles of what I think of the Ravens season long through this, 12 weeks, more so than it is about, last week they did blank.
And the Chargers defense, it's worth mentioning, right? And they talked about it on the broadcast. Their idea, the Chargers defense is keep everything in front of you. And even the Bengals were able to get behind that defense. But Lamar and company, they're very good at the slow, long drive. They're better than the Bengals at it, right? And so, Lamar will take the underneath throw over and over again, right? I imagine Derrick Henry is going to get more carries. I imagine the Ravens' run game is going to be more successful than the Bengals' run game, right? And again, all of that sort of understanding of maybe it's a better matchup for the Ravens, and the Bengals probably could have, should have maybe won that game. Certainly a 50-50 game when it came down to the last 2 minutes. If the ball just going back and forth. Yeah, it's a tough spot for the Chargers, and I'd be incredibly impressed if they won. And again, maybe there's some bias, and I'm wanting the Broncos to win and the Chargers to lose because of the bets that I talked about earlier. And this seems like that scenario where you might get that sort of flip in the standings as we get down to the final bit here. So yeah, it's a tricky one, man. But I think a really, really interesting game, especially with the way these two teams are kind of coming into it.
Lots going on in a busy week 12 in the NFL as we get ready for it. And a big game starts on Thursday night. But before we get to all of that, my friend, where can the people find you online to get all of the goodness that you're teeing up for us right now in terms of, the information and education that we all crave?
Thanks, pal. Well, we spent an hour and a half here. It won't take you that long to read the articles over at substack.com /mrussauthentic. I'm also at mrussauthentic on Twitter /X. So you'll be able to find anything that you need over there. Tweet everything that I write for Substack. They're free for the season. We've talked about this before. You probably already know all of this stuff. So yeah, come through the Twitter, come through the Substack, get subscribed up. You get everything sent directly to your inbox. Watching some, again, it's talking about being sick, right? So barely got the Monday Night Football stuff out this week. That was in everybody's inbox at 4 p.m. on Monday, when normally it's Sunday night. And watching some numbers at some because I put the specific book to bet at. Watching some of the numbers change pretty much instantly was kind of fun, because you knew that 100, 200, whatever people were instantly going to FanDuel and cracking CeeDee Lamb touchdown, even though it didn't end up getting anywhere. It was kind of fun. But the point is, right, you get it straight in your inbox, and you're getting an alert on your phone when you're subscribed via the Substack app. And so you're able to bet as soon as the bets are given out, and they're given out at the exact moment that I make them, essentially, right? So you're getting the same price, the same bet that I am, and I'm going out of my way in order to do that for everybody. And like I said, free for this season. We're going to go to a paid model next year. So if you like the conversations that Sheldon and I are having, you want to know more specifically, hey, like, when he says he's going to round robin the Browns with a bunch of teams this weekend, like, which teams is he going to round robin the Browns this weekend? That's where you go to the Substack. When you say, okay, totals, teasers, whatever, we get specific. And there's not a lot of places that get specific, track record, good, bad, or ugly out there. And having done this for a really long time, that's all I'm just trying to do, is sort of be just out there for the people, create a community where we're making bets, we're having a good time, we're, as I say, celebrating and commiserating. So come celebrate, come commiserate at MRS Authentic, either on Twitter or Substack.
Boom. Sounds like a plan for sure. And of course, my name is Sheldon Alexander. You can find me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander, on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. And the other part that's very interesting to me right now is I feel a winning week is ahead. I feel the vibes.
Oh, it
feel the
sounds
vibes. I'm just saying that
so
now.
good, right? Like you get to the end of this podcast, and you, me, the listener, we're all like, how do we lose?
Right. This is going to be a perfect week.
It makes so much sense. And then it's like the Raiders defense has lost Jonnu Smith in the middle of the field. You're like, what? Like, yeah, he's running down the field. Like, oh, huh? Whatever.
That's how it works. That's how they get us each
Dustin
and every week.
Hopkins from 27 yards. He just missed a 32-yarder. He can't possibly miss 27. Oh, wait, he does. Oh, cool.
Kickers, ban them all. Ban them all, I say. Anyways, as I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is a Clutch Picks Betting Podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya. Oh.